Welcome back to Fear and Beer, a Halloween Horror Nights podcast. Join us as we venture year-round into the fog.
Make sure you give us a like and a follow on your podcast platform of choice. Also, be sure to check out our YouTube page where we upload every episode in its video format, and maybe a few other surprises as well.
Make sure you're following us on social media to keep up to date with our newest haunted content.
I'm Nick.
I'm Seamus.
I'm Jamie.
And happy Friday the 13th. I caught that right before I started to record. I had to look at the dates because I was like, well, it's December. What's significant in December besides Christmas, of course? And that is Friday the 13th. We got a special episode today for Friday the 13th. We totally planned it based off the date. No, we didn't. I'm, of course, talking about what we posted on our socials yesterday. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, Marc Kleinhenz, who is one of the two kind of behind the creative team and one of the authors of the Horrors Untold book, which if you aren't familiar with it, stick around because we're going to be diving about as in-depth as we can. But I'm joined by Marc and of course with Jamie as well. So
Hello.
Jamie, hello. Marc, welcome to the Fear and Beer world.
Thank you. I have to say the best part of being welcomed into the Fear and Beer world is watching the two of you dance to your opening music. Like that just made my whole night, made the whole episode.
We have to vibe to it. We're still getting used to the new stuff. I got to figure out all the beats, you know, gotta get that thing down.
I can't resist.
I know, it gets the body moving. But Fear and Beer, I do have a beer. I have about a bunch of extra Bud Lights from the bachelor party that I had to attend to this last weekend. Thanks, Jimmy. I got left with a whole pack of canned water. So I'm just going to take these things down throughout these next couple of weeks because, well, I can't just stare at them. They got to go somewhere. But let's dive into this. This is a little bit of a different style episode, and we've done some interviewee style episodes in the past, and I figured it would be fun. And Marc, I didn't warn you about this part because these are pretty off the top, and I want to get honest answers. We kind of do 3 little questions just to kind of get a feel for people, just to see.
Oh God.
Yeah. Oh yes. And these are simple. I promise you will have no problem with these. And if I have any mind of where you're going to go with these, I expect these to be at least 15-minute long answers. So,
okay.
Very simply. If you had to pick one, what is your favorite horror movie? And I know that's tough. I know that's tough.
Yeah. So I have a confession to make. I am not the biggest fan of traditional horror.
Okay.
I kind of flirted with it. So I'm a child of the 80s, teenager of the 90s. I flirted with it with Resident Evil and falling in love with Silent Hill and all that kind of fun stuff. And I fell out of it because I don't like gore. I don't like slashers. I find all that stuff very off-putting personally, intellectually, emotionally, all those, wonderful adverbs. However, I love suspense. I love thrillers. I'm actually a huge M. Night Shyamalan fan, so I hope you don't boo me off the podcast.
We love M. Night around here.
For an M. Night style house at Horror Nights. I have been screaming from the rooftop for sure. Like either Signs or The Village. Either of those two, I'm completely content with.
So here's a fun little story. I hope I'm allowed to tell this. I have a couple of friends who have worked or do work for Universal Creative, Art and Design, etc. And one of them got to be involved with the Velocicoaster and to help film when Bryce Dallas Howard was there. And he's like, hey, I love The Village. And she's like, oh, yeah, I was very young during that movie, wasn't I?
That was, I think, growing up, that might still hold the record for like movie that I have seen in theaters most. I don't know what it was about it. I know it's, not his best. I know that was sort of, in other people's eyes, sort of the start of the decline, because after that kind of came, The Happening and stuff like that. But I think that is still, Sixth Sense is kind of like a whole different world. It's tough to kind of compare those ones, but I just love The Village so much.
I'll tell you that a lot of my writing of Horrors Untold was done to the Village soundtrack. So
amazing.
There you go.
Two peas in a pod. Then you fit in perfect here. There's really no more. You're in.
So maybe I would have to pick one of the Shyamalan movies as one of my favorite horror flicks. I really don't know. The Shining with Kubrick, of course, is,
Yep.
you have Kubrick's a god. You have to respect him no matter what. I really don't know. Something will come later on this podcast, when we're in hour 3 recording, I'll be like, oh, that's what it is. That's if you're asking me my favorite movie of all time, that's Mononoke Hime, Princess Mononoke. That's the kind of background and approach I take to film specifically.
Okay.
All right. Question 2. What would be your, I guess, favorite or ultimate like Halloween candy? If you were getting one candy piece for Halloween, what are you going for?
You're so funny.
These are the hard-hitting questions right here.
Probably Reese's Peanut Butter Cups.
Okay,
Classic.
that tells a lot. That's
wrong.
a good one.
Can't go wrong.
All right, and then the last one, which you sort of answered, but I'm curious if it stays a winner because you said, child of the 80s, grew up on the 90s. What is your favorite horror movie decade? If you had to kind of live in one. They are very, and with suspense, I feel like you get a lot of those newer aged ones in those 2000s and 2010s. But is there a certain decade that you can pinpoint and be like, okay, these are my movies?
Well, first I have to say I have I think he might be 3-month-old kitten now.
Okay.
And he loves to come down to my office in the basement when I'm here. And if you hear this racket rummaging around, that's the cat bouncing off the walls, literally. So sorry if that comes through.
You'll probably hear our dogs at some point.
I was going to say,
James's cat is a frequent of this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We have 4 cats, a dog, and a bird in this house, plus 3 kids. So I guess they're all animals, really.
It's a zoo.
I love it.
I really don't like the 80s.
Yeah.
Horror in the 80s. I'm sorry. I know that's definitely in vogue. And sorry, Jamie.
Oh, it's okay.
I can tell you that.
It's all right.
I've recently fallen into this kind of rabbit hole recently because of a different writing project that I'm working on that's unrelated to work, my day job, of kind of apocalyptic stories. Like It Comes at Night and oh God, it's too late. This is a late night for me. I can't remember the other one that I just discovered and I fell in love with it and I thought it was fantastic. M. Night Shyamalan's Daughter. I just watched that movie.
Oh, The Watchers.
Which yes.
Yes.
I definitely liked the premise a lot more than the execution.
I agree.
The first half I think was really, really cool in the second half. And funny enough, it actually has a lot of crossover with Horrors Untold. Because there's the standard horror trope of, what if these ancient tales and folklore, what if it's all based in reality somehow and these creatures or entities come back to haunt us again. So that's a very standard tried and true thing. But so I think maybe that kind of approach, that kind of style, I'm still working my way slowly through the A24 catalog. I tend to really dig those so far. So I guess that would have to be whatever decade all those movies happened. What is it? Mostly the teens, like late teens, early 20s.
Yeah, that's when they really started. That A24 just started a run, I think. And it's going to continue because now you have other production companies that seemingly put out similar stuff, like Neon with Long Legs is kind of like following in their footsteps, so to speak, and like putting out similar feeling, like good story, low budget, indie, almost horror that like is becoming mainstream. Like Long Legs with the wide release had such a big reach to everybody, and it's like this was kind of an indie movie, and I kind of dig that A24 and maybe before that, maybe Blumhouse like sort of walked so everybody else could run. But yeah, I think that late 2010s and stuff like that was when this started to kickstart in my eyes. But
actually, I'm sorry, I have to throw in one more movie there. There is a very nice guy who served as our story consultant, and I happen to appreciate his work before I happened to hit him up and I suckered him into this project to help us out. And he was the writer behind a movie called Lovely Molly. Have either of you guys seen that or?
I haven't. No, I haven't heard of that one.
Okay, one of the original Blair Witch Project directors did it. I love the original Blair Witch.
Yeah,
so does Nick. I think it came out 2010. I highly recommend you go watch it. It's very subtle and suspenseful and creepy, and it's all sorts of cool. So I would definitely throw that movie in there too.
Ooh,
Lovely Molly.
Right, I'll have to add that to the list.
Yes,
gotcha.
We'll add that to the list then. So yeah, and it's funny too. You bring up A24 because I just finished. Jamie has fallen in love with this movie. I'm not sure if you've seen it.
It's probably my favorite movie of the year.
I'll reel us back in after this point. But I saw the TV Glow. Not really like horror, but like I don't even know how to fully explain it. It was like a coming of age, trippy sci-fi tension, I guess. But it was an A24 film, and it was all right. I didn't hate
I
it,
guess you
didn't
could
love it.
classify it as a thriller, maybe in a sense.
Okay. It sounds
Yeah.
really cool.
For
I'll have to
some,
check it out.
but
was
I really
interesting.
enjoyed it. I feel like it's definitely not for everyone. Sometimes it's hard for me to get into movies with it being a little slow. I feel like this was a little bit slow, but still had a great payoff. It's shot beautifully. The soundtrack's really good. I really enjoyed it
Okay.
overall. It was something different. Yeah.
It's
I
in
like
the
slow
world.
burns.
It's in the world of like Donnie Darko. If I had to like put it to
Great,
like
great
its like
movie.
contender. Oh, Jamie
Mark-
loves that movie.
Oh, that's probably my favorite movie of all time.
I am a Donnie Darko hater. I am.
Yeah, unfortunately.
That's a
It's
badge
quite
I will wear. It's
unfortunate.
fine.
If we manage to hang out next to HHN, I'll dress up as that bunny for you with the rabbit
Frank.
suit.
See, I know the names. I know the names.
He
but,
does. I appreciate it. He's tried.
Oh yeah, I tried before, long before I even met you. I tried, but it was just not resonating. So before we get into Horrors Untold, let's get into like a little bit of you and HHN, because obviously Horrors Untold is heavily influenced and incorporates HHN, primarily Orlando, which is perfect because that's the event we all kind of know and love. So if you had to give like a little bit of a rundown of your history with HHN Orlando, why don't you take us through that? Maybe when you possibly started going, or just how you fell in love with this event and how it sort of influenced Horrors Untold.
Okay. So this is where I gather around all the childrens to tell a story about me, and everyone clicks off because, I'm not very interesting, as my wife will very happily tell you. So I kind of fell out of the world of theme parks in the 90s. And then in 2012, I came back. I took my wife for a big milestone birthday to Universal Orlando. That was my first time at Universal as a resort, as opposed to just one theme park. And I ended up working for this little site called Orlando Informer. And the guy who started OI is Dan Hatfield. He's the guy who's like the big mover and shaker behind Horrors Untold. We reconnected. And he started talking about HHN. And I'm like, what is this thing? What are you talking about? And so by working at that site and getting promoted and eventually becoming editor-in-chief, I learned to appreciate HHN from afar. And that actually helped me get back into horror. That helped me kind of, like, I never would have watched the new Ghostbusters movies, for example, even though I was a child of the 80s. Without HHN, I fell in love for a while with American Horror Story, thanks to the event. So I feel like a lot of personal gratitude for that. And I really started to do these articles. I tried very hard to do in-depth, like summations of the franchise's history and where it came from and what's the relevance to Universal. Like one of the very last ones I did before I quit OI was Beetlejuice. So like, let's talk about Beetlejuice's incorporation into USF since day one, basically. Nice. And so finally, it wasn't until 2017 that I actually got to go myself. So I was always like from afar doing this thing, and kind of, I would, thanks to my friends in the business, I would get tipped off months before what the houses were. So like, January, February, I'd be binging all these TV episodes, be watching all the movies, doing research on the directors and the writers, trying to, distill it down to something that was concise, unlike this answer, something concise and short and consumable. And I've only gone a couple times since then, unfortunately, but I have to say, my co-writer in the book was Xandra Hardigree, and she like lives and breathes that event.
Yeah.
And so having her constantly there and having me more of like from afar, kind of like a distant, more analytical perspective, I think it was a nice balance. And because of that, I feel like having gone these last couple of years and seeing what it's like on the ground, it really kind of underscores for me, like that event really changed from 2018 to 2022, 23. Like it really, the crowds exploded, the prices exploded. And obviously there's inflation, there's COVID, there's other macroeconomical things going on, economic. So this is why I'm a writer. I have to type things. But still, like the event has changed quite a bit since I've started writing about it and researching it and all that fun stuff.
And that is definitely the one part that stood out to me was definitely sort of like a very bizarre, not stance, but occurrence, is that the IP is being so popular and selected for Horror Nights. The fact that it was at Horror Nights got you into the IP itself. Like it was almost working in reverse there, which is
basically,
which is really cool, because like that's a side of IP that we don't typically think of, right? We always think of like, oh, picking the IP because everybody knows about it and it's going to draw a crowd versus like, oh, I got into American Horror Stories because of this event. So that's really cool. That's interesting.
A Quiet Place is something I never would have watched, and man, I've fallen in love with those movies. I guess that fits into the whole bucket of, you know, like apocalyptic, quiet, apocalyptic, maybe more thoughtful types of stories like that. Yeah,
and that's cool too. Seeing it, like how was it after writing about it for all these years and then like really coming face to face with it? That's got to be such a. I mean, you obviously you know people, you see pictures, and like you have an idea of the event, but did it really like surpass what you kind of had in mind, or was it pretty much what you thought it was?
You know, it's funny. My very first house I did with the second owner of OI, and we walked out. I'm like, you know, he's like, so what'd you think? And I'm like, it was nice, but it was kind of like Cedar Point's. You know, Cedar Point has this very kind of dinky Halloween Weekends thing. It's nowhere near the budget or the scope, and to even compare it is just a huge disservice to Universal and HHN. So I apologize. But like, my first impression was like, this isn't Mecca. This isn't. The streets aren't made of gold. You know, the budget's there, and you can tell the quality is there, but like, it's not quite. You know, I have a friend who's from Australia. He's visited almost every single Disney park in the world. And when he finally made it to America, he's like, because he grew up, you know, worshiping basically American culture and everything. And he got here, he's like, oh, you guys have dirty streets too. Like you guys, like, the streets aren't made of gold. That's where I got that from him.
Yeah.
And like, it's a cool country. I like it. He's come back a couple of times, but it's like, it's not Mecca, you know, it's not divine.
Yeah.
And so my first impression was, yeah, it's okay. And then very quickly after that, I'm like, no, I see what's going on.
Yeah,
it started to sink in, and I started to realize, and you have to look underneath the you know, beneath the surface and see how these things kind of form together. And by the end of that first night, I was like, yeah, I'm hooked. This is great. I'll come back for sure.
Yep, you drank the fog. I mean, the juice. You drank it all.
Yeah, basically.
It's definitely interesting because I remember someone telling me about it. This was when I lived in Massachusetts during 25. And one of my friends from down here was just like, hey, I know you like Freddy versus Jason. They're doing a Freddy versus Jason haunted house. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I guess I'll come down like for my birthday and we'll check it out. Like that sounds cool. But I was going in completely blind, and like 25 is a year that I wish I could go back now and visit it because I would appreciate it on so many different levels versus being that typical IP they got me. Like that was how I was introduced to Horror Nights versus, you know, Jamie's a local. She's kind of been going for forever, so she's seen the evolution of it, and plenty of other Orlando locals that are like, oh, that was just like our thing to do in high school, or that was just like the local thing, versus, you know, being drawn by an IP and having no idea what I don't know what Jack the Clown was. You know, I think, you know, they had Psychoscarapy. To me, that meant nothing at the time. You know, now I have such a deeper appreciation for it, and it is fun because there's, like you said, there's so much below the surface that if you want to dig deep into lore and characters and all these little crazy Easter eggs, they take the time to hide that for everybody, which is really cool.
It is totally impressive, and I apologize for comparing it to Cedar Point.
No, it's okay.
But yeah, so we actually got to spend opening weekend together on Saturday. We got to do the RIP tour, and obviously we shared some thoughts on the night and the event as a whole. But I figured enough time has sort of passed. The season's over, the fog is gone. So overall on your thoughts for this year, what did you think compared to, you know, whether it's yesteryear or the years prior or something like that? Where does it sort of stack up for you?
I don't think you can talk about us hanging out opening weekend without talking about how it started and how I hit you up out of the blue. Like some of the other guys I've talked to for the last several years, like Duff and some of the people from Catacombs of HHN, but unfortunately I've never stalked and bothered you guys before. And so I'm like, hey, Nick, why don't you come to this private RIP tour? And he's like, okay, sure. How much does it cost? I'm like, no, this isn't a scam. Like, we wouldn't invite you and make you pay for it. And so pretty quickly, though, we're like, hey, aren't you glad that you accepted an invitation from a stranger? And you're like, yes, I'm glad that, you know, I walked into a possible trap and you could have stabbed me.
I've walked into worse situations.
Okay. Yeah, right.
I've been in darker alleys. I'm good with that.
She told
but
me,
I remember that too. I was like, this is interesting. And then because you mentioned Duff and Hunter and everybody like that, so I was like, I messaged Hunter. I was like, this Mark guy is gonna just message me, offer me like to go on a RIP tour. He's like, oh, Mark's awesome. It's really good. I was like, okay, I was just checking because you get random messages from random people on occasion,
for sure.
and sometimes it's real, sometimes it's not, and I have my guard up. I'm not completely
as you should.
Yeah, I'm not completely like, hey, yeah, let's go over here and do this and that. But I did my research in about 5 minutes and messaged Hunter. He said thumbs up, and I was like, all right, that's enough for me.
When you do articles or you're in podcasts, you definitely sometimes attract very interesting, far-flung individuals. I remember one guy hit me up out of nowhere. He thought I still lived in Japan. I used to live in Japan almost 20 years ago now, Jesus, before I was married and had kids. And he's like, hey, I'm visiting Japan. I'll buy you dinner. Are you still in Kobe? I'm like, no, I've been gone for 5 years. Sorry, but I really appreciate that's so nice of you.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I really still don't have, like I told you that night, like my thoughts are very incoherent. I need time to sit and stew and think on things. I'm also the kind of person, I need to watch something multiple times. I need to reread books several times. This year I was only able to get away to HHN that one night. So I definitely don't feel qualified to give any kind of, fateful pronouncements on definitive statements on what it was. I also kind of have my impressions influenced by what I hear off the record behind the scenes. And so I don't, what I can tell you is, so I brought my wife with me.
Yeah.
My wife she hates horror. She's the kind of person who's like, you always go first. I'll hide behind you. This is the second time she managed to go. And I'll tell you, for her, and I'm telling you the story because I have a lot of resonance with it, with me. She's like, oh, this isn't scary. It's a Congo line of people that go through some sets. Some are, detailed, some are less so. They all kind of bleed together, especially if you do a private tour and you're lucky enough to do all 10 houses multiple times in one night. And so for her, she's like, the Ghostbusters house stood out to me because it was different. It looked different. It felt different. It had something of a different theme. I wish Universal would spend more money on making the houses and the experiences more individualized. And that's something I totally agree with. Obviously, it's never going to happen because they have their budget, they have their formula. And I don't mean formula with any kind of derogatory connotation. I just mean they know what works, and obviously it works very well. It attracts lots of people, so they're going to keep doing it. It's a mass-produced item for a mass audience. And I personally would prefer something more bespoke, something more experimental, something where the houses were completely different from each other.
Yeah.
So that's my kind of more macro take. It's still a fun event. I still really enjoy it. I'll go every year if I can, if my kids will let me. I have a toddler right now. She's a little tyrant. But I do think it really has become homogenized to a very large extent.
Yeah, and that's we did see. Well, I don't know if we saw what they told us, but I remember them initially before the event kickstarted, they kept referring to A Quiet Place as sort of a experiment, for lack of a better word. It was a different experience. It was a haunted house and quiet don't necessarily go hand in hand, but this is what they were trying to do. And, they definitely took a big swing with it. And I think what they tried to do was fun. I'm not personally a huge fan of, all primarily animatronics. Like I like the human aspect of it. But to your point of like trying some different stuff, it is cool that, going into their 33rd year, they are still, they do have, like you said, the formula of, they know what's going on and what works, what doesn't, but they're still willing to every now and then throw a little risk out there and be like, all right, let's kind of dip our toes slightly into this pond. And, not enough that it will push people away, but if it works, it works, and we can kind of go a little bit deeper next time. So I do appreciate that about Universal and Horror Nights. They don't always play it safe. They primarily do just because it's not an event you can botch. You can't come out with 10 experimental houses and be like, oh, sorry, this year sucked. We tried. Like,
right.
But they're trying and doing some new interesting stuff, which leads me to believe that down the line we're going to kind of continue seeing maybe every other year or every now and then at least something a little different, at least one thing that's maybe this works, maybe it doesn't, because like you said, you have to try it on a smaller scale before you can roll it out completely.
Sure. And if there's one thing that studying the history of HHN has taught me, it's that it's not, well, I guess no history of any single facet of human existence really is a linear thing where A leads to B leads to C. We go through these kind of tangents. We go down cul-de-sacs. We go back. We change. There's different personnel behind the scenes who come and go. So what it is today is obviously not what it was last decade or 20 years ago. And so looking forward to 20 years, I think I can almost guarantee we wouldn't be able to predict what it's going to look like and feel like then.
Yeah, no, it's and like you said, the different people behind the scenes, like, they obviously, if you're higher up, you heavily influence it based off of kind of what you were interested in, and you can feel that handprint on an event based off of who was kind of behind it all and stuff like that. So is there any like houses that stand out like all time for you that are like your top couple?
I'm laughing, one, because I really don't have anywhere near a big of a palette as you guys have. But also number two, because one of my very first houses was Scarecrow.
And okay. So yeah, I mean, what a way to start.
So that's a good one to start with.
It's only downhill from here. I'm sorry.
Yeah, literally.
That's the gold standard for me. I will tell you, because I'm very pretentious and I'm very boring, I like the serious stuff. The comedy house is really like, okay, all right, sure, I'll do it. But man,
yeah.
So with Goblin's Feast, I'm like, okay, this sounds kind of cool, but they're probably going to do it in a very corny fashion. But man, when I got in there, that's one of my favorite houses from this year. Like that really stood out to me as well.
It was a wonderful house. And I usually really don't like the comedy houses that much as well. Because I mean, we're going to horror nights. Like I want to get scared, That's why I feel like I enjoyed it so much, because it was such a, I wouldn't say intensely scary house, but just scarier than we've seen in the past years. But Goblins, just the house design was great. The scare actors were fun. It was just better than I anticipated it to be.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I remember when that, and we've said this a couple times in the past, but I remember when that announcement came out, and we were both at home, and I could hear her on the porch, like, "Oh, what the hell is this?"
It was like one of the first announcements. And then she comes busting in.
I'm like, I know.
Man, I was like, goblins. I was like, this is going to be so corny, because I'm not a huge like fantasy person, like that kind of stuff. But Dueling Dragons I enjoyed, because just from the ride back in the day and the nostalgia and all that attached to it. But yeah, the Goblins really did it for me. Honestly, it was in my top 3 this year for houses overall.
Speaking of getting into history and stuff, I did a lot of research into Christmas, the history of Christmas, and how it became modern day Halloween for us here in America, and looking into a lot of the Germanic folklore, which I've never done before. My wife teaches Beowulf. She can actually recite a line in Old English for you, which is really cool.
She puts me
to shame. In Old English, just for the record, like everyone thinks Shakespeare's Old English. Shakespeare's Modern English. Old English is like runes. There's no letters. It's all like, it sounds like German, basically. So I have no exposure to this, but when I was doing some research into elves and everything else, and you hear about King Gandalf, and he was a real like monarch of a real country, and you start to, I think that would help, maybe, at least for me, being a nerd, it would help you appreciate fantasy a bit more, perhaps, to see like some of the actual, for lack of a better word, some of the substance, the historical substance that's behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can we make that into an HHN house? Can we have like, the literary book nerd historian house?
Right.
And I mean, the people behind Horror Nights too, like they are they are history buffs themselves too. So I feel like it is only a matter of time before they turn that rock over and they're like, oh wait, what do we got over here? Because this could work. So let's get into.
That is a good point.
Yeah, it's bound to happen at some point, I'd say.
If you do something every single year and you can't stop, you have to explore every avenue that's available to you. I'm sorry, I cut you off. Please continue.
Oh, I was gonna say, well, let's get into this. So I have the book right here, the Horrors Untold
there
book,
it
which
is.
Kind of black on black design. You can sort of see it on the cameras. Thick. It's a thick boy right here. It's like, was it 335, 332 pages?
The first edition is 324. The new one is 4 pages shorter. We have a second edition that's just coming out now. It has a red cover, actually.
Nice.
Someone told me it looks like we're capturing demons.
Okay, which we'll get into that. But as you can see, this is full of text, images, puzzles, riddles. It has a little bit of everything in here. So what our plan is tonight is to sort of get everyone to feel like they have an understanding of this world, because this is something new to me. I wish I could say I was a bigger reader. it was never really never really my jam, I guess. I just never, I read a couple books here and there, and I kind of go back to my favorites, and that's that. But this is far from just a book. This is, an interactive kind of one of a kind. I don't even know how to completely describe it. Like a narrative puzzle, I think is the term that would probably be best suited for this.
Works for me.
So yeah, right. So the creative team, I did strip these from online. So I have you and Dan were kind of the go-getters behind this event, and then you and Xandra wrote this together. And you had special thanks. I did want to shout out the special thanks because there's Seth on there, who I don't know who Seth is, but I know who Hunter is. So I did want to shout out Hunter. But yeah, so I mean, what kickstarted this idea of Horrors Untold? Where did I know, just from what I know about you, this is sort of, you love the history. You love writing.
Yeah.
You're an author. But how did you get from writing articles at OI about Horror Nights to coming up with creating this whole mystery puzzle?
When I quit OI, I reached out to Dan Hatfield. Dan sold the site back in 2014, 2015, the beginning of 2015, and we lost contact. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, I worked there for 9 years. Thank you for hiring me way back when. And he's like, oh, I want to hire you again. I'm like, oh, okay, sure. Why? What? And he said, he missed so he moved back north to be with his family and to do other businesses. And he missed Orlando. He missed the parks. And he really wanted to do something new and different. Sorry, I don't want to cough in the microphone. He wanted something that would be challenging and that would kind of go at the parks in a completely new and never been tried before way. And I'm laughing at that now because, man, it took us like 2.5 years to figure this thing out. We're still figuring it out. We're still trying to make it better. We're still there's a reason why no one has done a book before that's part fiction, part nonfiction, and part puzzles. It's insane. And so our big goal, we wanted to do something about HHN. We wanted to do something that would teach you about the history and the mythology and that would walk you through everything. We figured that'd be good for diehard veterans because, hey, there's 30-something years of history. You kind of maybe lose the thread on who's that character, what year did she appear? But also for newbies, obviously, because like you said, there's so much to dive into and it can be overwhelming. But my big thing that he pushed me to come up with was I wanted to capture the best part of a theme park. The best part of a horror event is the immersion. You're being thrust into a different reality, a different story, hopefully a different emotion. Hopefully it's fear. Hopefully it's a whole bunch of different things. And so we kind of figured out, we reverse engineered, how can you capture that essence in a bottle? And how can that bottle be transformed into a book or a different product? We went through a whole bunch of different iterations, a whole bunch of different things. And so our goal was to make it feel like you were at a HHN. It could be at your house, it could be on the plane, it could be anywhere. And when I say we wanted you to feel like you're at HHN, I don't mean hey, you're at a street party, here's the loud music, here's the drunk people, here's the food. Yeah. I mean, you're about to walk into a haunted house. That chill, that suspense, that idea that you're going into this unknown reality and it's going to scare you at some point. How can you capture that and make that into a product? So you take that and you wrap it around the factual stuff of learning about HHN. And that's how this book became part fiction, part nonfiction. And doing the puzzles and the riddles and everything else, that's kind of like icing on the cake. We kind of pitch it like it's 40% HHN, 40% original story, 20% narrative, puzzles. You don't have to do them if you don't want to. They just become kind of like fancy window dressing. Oh yeah, I see there's a mark there or there's a cryptic clue. And it just helps maybe the atmospherics. It helps with the immersion. But if you do want to do them, it not only extends the experience longer for you, it also unlocks some kind of epilogues, like little codas, almost kind of like after credit scenes in a Marvel movie.
Yeah.
And having all that together, it just, like I said, never been done before. And now we know why.
It's definitely I can only begin to imagine the undertaking that it was to create this, like you said, kind of starting backwards almost, this is the feeling we want. And we kind of have this ending. Let's introduce all this history and weave it so, creatively that it works in one cohesive story still. And this is something that I think will probably maybe help me stay in focus on these books is the puzzles and the like, because then I'll be looking for stuff.
That's what I was going to say
typically
too.
when I'm reading, I'm just kind of like, I'll buzz through like a couple pages and then I think back, I'm like, wait, what just happened? Like, I didn't really fully bring in those words and what was happening. I got to go back now and read. But now with this, I'll be dialed in and like, all right, this has, and Jamie knows I'm just bizarre when it comes to like clue scanning. I think everything's a clue. Like
he loves riddles. Really enjoys riddles, puzzles, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, he's got to decipher something. If it's there, it's deciphered. Honestly, he's pretty good with the Horror Nights ones too. When it usually comes out, and I'm like, you know what, it's not even gonna bother. Yeah.
I like the idea of puzzles, but like trying to sit down. I did one escape room and I failed miserably. I was with a friend. He's like, "Oh, you should be able to do this." I'm like, "I don't know." And no, it was embarrassing.
Nick also.
So that's why we had to hire like professional puzzle designers and game designers to come in and help us with that stuff.
Yeah, I love escape rooms too. That's like, I don't know why. I just love that weird, bizarre stuff. But I can imagine. I mean, that's a whole different science when it comes to writing and stuff like that too, because I can't.
Oh, it really is. Yeah.
You can write, and whether it's fiction or nonfiction, that's probably a non-issue, right? You can just switch it up a little bit, and you might prefer one over the other. But when it comes to creating and hiding and spanning out a riddle, that's a whole different ball game right there.
It is, and because I don't come from that world, the puzzle world at all. Our puzzle designer, Mairi, who lives in Scotland, she's like, this has never been done before the puzzle side either, because usually you have a puzzle book that's there. Not the story is the window dressing for the puzzles and the mechanics, but to have it where it's fundamentally like a narrative and then the puzzles kind of work in conjunction with that, that's not normal.
Yeah, right.
And so for her, it was exciting. And then we started like shooting ideas back and forth, and like there's, not to get too detailed right now, but there's 3 different buckets of the puzzles. And one of them has to do with all the HHN chapters. And the idea there is that there's a person who went missing. He was writing about HHN. You find out in the first page that he's been killed. He's had all these sigils and strange symbols inscribed in his flesh. And so you have like an autopsy, like diagram of his body. You have to find out what those symbols were and draw them on his body. And his hand's missing. And my puzzle designer is like, hey, I want to use the hand. That's the puzzle mechanic. Like, we'll make people cut the hand out of the book, and then you have to position it on different pages, and you have to fold it in different combinations, and that reveals the symbols, and the fingers will point at a certain word. Like, for example, I got ahead of you, Nick. The sentence by itself is, that's what it is. But when the finger points to a head, you're like, oh, okay, I see. Here's the sigil. It has to go on Hunter's head. Hunter, not Hunter, our friend from the podcast, but Hunter, the fictitious character. So yeah, like just as we started riffing off ideas, she's like, oh my God, it's kind of weird because it's almost like you're doing the ritualistic sacrifice of Hunter because you're drawing on his body. It's like, it's almost in a way, it's like another way of immersion. It's this visceral response. And I had a friend who was looking at the hand being folded and bent in weird ways. And he's like, that's not natural. Like that's creepy. Just looking at this paper hand. I know it's paper, but like moving that in weird ways, so you can see how these different kinds of things all stack atop of each other and how, again, the goal is immersion.
Which is so cool. Again, speaking on the term of it being a one-of-a-kind kind of thing and never done before, I've obviously heard of, kind of choose your own adventure books and stuff like that, but I've never seen or heard of something in the sense that you're cutting out something from this book to place it in the book and use it almost as a key or a pointer. That's just so above and beyond interactive because, when you think of a book, you're like, okay, I sit there, I read, I take the information from the book into my brain. You don't map it out and feel around and actually physically move with the book. So that's such a cool way to stand out and truly, like you said, never been done before.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to say too, not to cut you off, Mark, I just feel like that's just one of the best part about books too, is that you could be immersed in that universe through a book as well. And I feel like this could even be for people who don't get to frequent HHN as often or who've never been before and want to do something like this, and just adding that extra immersive feature where you're actually hands-on doing stuff with the book. I mean, the creativity was already to begin with, and then you just guys had to go over the top with it. I just think it's awesome. It's great, honestly.
Over the top,
I
yes.
know how
Thank you.
time-consuming writing can be, so just to think of me, I do more article writing and stuff like that as well, but just to think a whole book just is overwhelming in its own, so applaud to all of you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Xandra did all the HHN stuff. She did some of the original stuff as well. All the Hunter, like Hunter was her character.
That's awesome.
My character was Marjorie, and I did all the original stuff. So it's not, it basically boils down to 50-50 almost. I think actually it's like 55 her and 45 me. So I had a lot of help, obviously. And Seth Kubersky, the guy you didn't know, he's the author of all the unofficial guides to Universal.
Nice.
And,
okay.
We needed to have someone write an article about all of the fictitious events that are going on in Orlando, all these strange occurrences, which I can bore you with later if you like. And I'm like, what if we got a real like theme park journalist basically to do it? And so we hit Seth up and he said, yeah, I'll write that for you. Sure. It was fun for him because he got to do all these weird, crazy like sightings and things. And so, yeah, it's a big, major coordinated team effort.
And that it brings up like two things. So then when this whole first started, when you were talking with Dan and the idea of you wanted to get that feeling of being at Horror Nights was involving Horror Nights like from the get-go. Was that part of this, or was it ever like just a fictitious style book, like horror related, but not Horror Nights?
Actually, the very first thing we talked about, which is even crazier and more complicated and more time consuming, was we wanted to take this approach of bottling the immersion and making you feel like you were there, but we wanted to do it for all of Universal Orlando Resort. Oh, okay. And if this is successful and we're lucky enough to continue with this new startup company and all these bizarre ideas, I do want to get there. I do want it to be something that comes to light in some way, but HHN was going to be one of the components of that.
Okay.
And as we started researching it and looking into it and like the manufacturing costs and, you know, legal counsel and everything else, it just ballooned. Like the budget of this thing was just insane. And so it was suggested to us, why don't you start with something a little bit smaller? And I say a little bit smaller because Horrors Untold still took a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of trial and error. Yeah, it was no, like we thought, oh, this sure, we can do this. And, you know, cut to 3 years later, like, oh my God, we were so stupid.
What did we try? What did we do?
But the idea that this could be applied to other parts of Universal or the resort as a whole, or go to Disney World and SeaWorld, and maybe like, you know, it can even branch out to New Orleans, which is a fantastic city I got to go to just before COVID hit. Like it was our last trip, like literally weeks before COVID broke out. Broke out here, I should say, not in China. Yeah, the idea that you can kind of like how can you take the atmosphere of New Orleans with all of its craziness and all of its different components and the cemeteries and the World War II museum and plus the parties, obviously, and the drinking and everything. Like, how can you distill that into a product that you can have at your house? The sky really is the limit. And I hope that we have the opportunity to try to be stupid all over again with a whole different thing.
Yeah, that's it's just getting the wheels turning of all these different possibilities is really cool, because like you really could take this and apply it to, like you just said, any sort of other park or location or anything like that. That's really I definitely do not envy your future years of work, because I from what I know about you is you will just get down that rabbit hole and you will just go and go and go.
Yes, that's I do these research tangents for sure. I hope I'm lucky enough to be that stupid. I think that would be a fantastic. This has been the best job I've ever had in my life. It's been great. I've had a lot of freedom to do all these crazy things, and it's hopefully people have fun consuming it and trying to bend hands in different ways and stuff.
Yeah, I can't wait to dive into this. What I really liked. It's such a bizarre, but I think. Maybe I'm making this up completely, but I know you said you liked Blair Witch. Did that influence the idea of having this Hunter the Haunter social media presence turned into kind of Horrors Untold? Was that sort of like a real life meeting fiction? Was that influenced at all by that, or am I just connecting two random things here?
No, I could definitely see how you would think that. That actual thing, like starting off with Hunter having his own collection of social media accounts, and then there's the twist of, oops, sorry, this is just a book. That actually was all Xandra. That was all her idea.
Okay. All right.
I don't remember if she's a found footage person or not. For me, found footage, that really manifested itself, that my passion for that particular subgenre, all of Horrors Untold is itself found footage. Every chapter is a different material that was collected by someone or another and put together in this book. And so that means this is yet another way this book has never quite been done before. Every chapter has a different look. It has a different format. It has a different feel. It has a different color palette. It's a very kind of kaleidoscopic, random, chaotic thing to zigzag from, there goes the kitten again, from chapter to chapter. And so that by itself would have, I think, put this, like our layout designer, she's been laying out books for, I think, almost 15 years. She's never done anything like this before. And she had other clients look at it, or friends, or people who are just passing through her office. They're like, okay, what the hell is that? She goes, oh, this is just one page. Let me show you the other page. And they're like, there's the Christmas book excerpt where, there's all the handwritten notes everywhere. And one of the other chapters, you have to turn it sideways to read it. It's just like, it's a bizarre thing. And then you put on top of that the whole HHN component, and then you put on top of that all the puzzles and riddles and everything else. Okay, so I got lost in my answer. Oh, yes, found footage. That's where the whole Blair Witch thing came from. And then we were lucky enough to work with Jamie Nash, who has worked with the Blair Witch guys quite a bit. That's the guy who wrote Lovely Molly, which, remember, okay. Lovely Molly, you have to go look that up.
I got it on my list. Yeah, that's a genre that I also love too, which intrigues me even more about the book, having that sense of being at Horror Nights, that sense of me solving riddles, in the sense of kind of I stumbled upon something I probably shouldn't have. That's a feeling that I definitely enjoy.
I never would have articulated that consciously, but that's precisely the feeling we were going for. So thanks. We're going to put that in our advertising copy.
There we go. I've always wanted to be on something. So we've been talking about this, and we're talking riddles, puzzles, interaction, and stuff like that. And it does, on the surface, sound pretty like advanced. So is there ways? I mean, you mentioned you can just read through this. Would you suggest people maybe read through it and then try to attack the riddles, or do it as one go? Like, I don't want to scare off anybody that, we did say this is a one of a kind thing, so people can't really have a background in doing something like this. But, for the average person out there, an average reader, or maybe even a below average reader, or somebody who maybe doesn't pick up books, but since this is in their wheelhouse, they might attack it. Is there a way to not beginnerify it, but, how would somebody attack this that was in that kind of category?
So I'm going to take you on another tangent very quickly with a little movie called Memento.
Okay. Christian Bale.
I'm not a fan of all of Christopher Nolan's movies, but I really do like Memento quite a bit. That was another huge influence, the story structure of that and how it all interacts. And we won't go down that rabbit hole. But I will tell you, there was once upon a time these things called DVDs, which I loved and collected. And there was a collector's edition of Memento. And in order to get to just the menu, just like to play the movie, you put on subtitles, whatever, you had to go through all these psychological evaluation tests from screen to screen to screen. And the first time you do that, you're like, that's wonderful. That's really immersive. That's great. And the second time you're like, oh my God, would you just go, I just want to watch the movie. I want to, skip chapters. So I always thought about that, because if you are in the mood, if you have an hour to kill that night or whatever, and you want to go through it step by step, definitely it's designed to do that. However, if you just want to read something about HHN, we made it very clear up front in the table of contents. Like we really wanted you to be able to see the HHN content right away. You can clearly single in on it. You can turn to that page. You can dive into it. You can do what you want. And the HHN content specifically, there's a chapter about the history of the event. There's a chapter, one of the biggest things I'm most proud of is this giant encyclopedia-esque approach to, there's a section about all the different icons. There's a section about the locations. There's a section about recurring characters or concepts. And to have that written out, and there's that chapter has its own table of contents. So you can go to the first page and then just jump around however you want to. I definitely wanted this to be a very flexible project or product. I wanted you to be able to dive into it the way you wanted to. ideally, in my mind, you would clear out the whole weekend, of course, tell the kids to go away, kittens stop playing, and just, you go page by page. You would do the riddles in conjunction with the chapters. That's something that Jamie Nash, our story consultant, the Blair Witch kind of guy, he really got excited when we pitched him on that idea. Like, okay, wait a minute. I get to every HHN chapter gives me a new symbol I can put in a hunter's body. So it's kind of like I'm growing and changing in my understanding of the event and understanding of the story. And Hunter's solution is his murder mystery thing is kind of growing and changing with me in real time. And that's something that's really cool and dynamic, but you don't have to do that. If you'd rather just read everything and enjoy the story, hopefully, and, appreciate more about HHN Orlando, and then go back and do all the puzzles in a row, that's perfectly fine too. We definitely did not want to preclude any one of these different approaches to the book.
Yeah. So if you heard it here. If the first 45 minutes of this sounded a little bit too crazy, it is not. You can do it. We have faith in you. We trust you to do this. Is there any other info that you kind of had on this that you want to get out? Because I feel like we talked a lot about this so far, and I'm just kind of dying to dive in myself, because now I'm off Saturday, I'm off Sunday. I can kind of pretend like Christmas isn't around the corner, abandon shopping, and just dive into this myself. But is there any other like special components that, Jamie, you wanted to like ask about that you've kind of been intrigued by?
So how you were saying for the HHN chapters of it and aspects of it, how you were kind of diving into the icons and past characters and stuff like that. How far back into the lore did you guys go to? Have you gone since the beginning of HHN time, or was it kind of when you started getting more into the event?
Our goal was to cover from Fright Nights 1991
sweet
up until 2023.
Nice.
And we knew that there had to be an endpoint. Like, the book can't endlessly update itself, although trust me, I would love it if we could.
Right.
So it's the first 33 years of event history.
That's awesome.
We do, and it's funny because obviously, as different people have come in and they've changed the storyline, there's retroactive continuity and all these wonderful things that we know from soap operas and Walking Dead and whatever else. We call that out in an in-world way, in a very generous way. We're not like, oh my God, look at these people. It's kind of like, oh, hey, Dr. Oddfellow's history originally from the year 2010 or whatever year it may be said this. And then for 2023, when he was introduced in the event more fully and became an icon, they kind of switched things around. So we definitely tried to, and that's another way that the found footage format really helps, because you can have the book that you're reading, and then you can have a little scrap of paper that the character Hunter was writing on as he was researching the stuff to write the book. And you can insert the different scraps and the different notes, and you can see him scribble something out and go, no, that's not right. It's actually this.
Yeah.
So that is an answer. I forget what the question was. I hope that's an appropriate answer to your question.
No, it definitely is. Yes. It's the amount of research you guys probably did is extensive. So it's impressive, because that's one thing I enjoy about the event as well, is just going from when I was a kid and seeing it evolve how it is now, and all the different icons we've had in the past and all their backstories that they really go into, even before HHN started doing their podcast kind of on like the lore of the houses or Oddfellow when they had it in the previous years and stuff like that. It's just interesting to have it compiled right there in a book for you. So I love that.
That is one thing when we're talking about doing this book. It's like, well, there's other, I don't want to name drop for good or bad reasons. I don't want to name drop or point fingers at anyone else, but there are other books out there. There's a couple sites out there. There's a couple of things. And obviously there's this thing called a wiki, and you can go to endless amount of articles. We wanted it to be more cohesively approached. We wanted okay, we'll cut it off at 2023 and we'll say, this is the whole tome, if you will. This is all the information. We're going to write it out for you in a way that's way more succinct than 25 different wiki articles, and hopefully it's better written and more enjoyable. There's like a rhythm to it. There's all those lovely mechanic things I learned as an English major in college. Oh my God, cat, go away. So there is that. There's also the thing, I actually, because I wasn't the main author of the HHN stuff, I discovered a couple things that I didn't know about, even though I was writing about this for a big site for many years. For example, we have a whole little thing all about the Eternal Rest package that was at Hard Rock Hotel. And we tried our hardest. We tried to track down people. We reached out to everyone we knew and people we didn't know. Kind of like when I reached out to Nick and he's like, is this a scam? No one knows about it. Like, no one did it. No one was there. It's like this. It's this thing that's lost to time. It's universal history, by the way, is so funny. The year 1999 at Islands of Adventure might as well not exist. It might be in the Stone Age. There's no evidence of like, the Toon Lagoon amphitheater show. There's a little clip of like Rosie O'Donnell and how she changed it. That's a whole different rabbit hole.
Weird. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. People, I know obviously this is several years before the advent of the smartphone, but people still had cameras, Seth was still writing things. He could have it's a black hole. So some of the stuff really is a black hole. The very first house that we had at HHN Orlando, the Dungeon of Terror, that's kind of like this nebulous, amorphous thing that Xandra spent a lot of time stitching together a walkthrough. Like if you were there today walking through it, what would it be like? And so that's one of the, Nick, you asked me like, what are some of the, like the selling points or the items that I'm most proud of? That's actually one of them. We have a map of Cary, Ohio that we stitched together using the real Cary layout as our, and it's funny because we also have this kind of custom made map of Islands of Fear, and that's really beautifully, lavishly illustrated. Our illustrator is a very lovely girl named Elena, who was a scare actor out in Hollywood in past years. And she's very, very talented. We were very lucky to get her. And she did a wonderful job with Islands of Fear. And then when it came time to do Cary, this is more of like, it's supposed to be the character of Hunter doing it. He's not as talented as Elena. Right. So it almost kind of looks more homespun, almost kind of looks like a quilt. Like if you're flipping through the book and you land on that page, you're like, oh, this is kind of like a quilt patchwork. But it's still in its own way. I think it's very beautiful and well realized. And being able to provide stuff like that, talking about Islands of Fear, talking about Cary, going through and we have a quick little rundown of just at Cabana Bay. What are the different events that's a more recent thing, obviously, but having our own custom artwork that's very obviously Cabana Bay, but not, too much like Cabana Bay.
yeah, just enough.
Doing stuff like that. Yeah. It really puts you in this kind of weird parallel world. And I think that the whole thing, it's the overlapping again of the different kind of layers and environments and narrative threads and just everything else.
That is such a cool, like, tricky thing to do too, because, like you mentioned, you can go onto the wiki and you can see these lists. I'm sure there's a Cary, Ohio page and you can see it all, but to like map it out systematically and be like, okay, this would be over here. This would be here. This would be here. It's a much different style of viewing Cary, Ohio versus just seeing a list of like, okay, these are the locations. Got it. Cool. Mm-hmm. But seeing an actual physical map of it's really cool. And
right,
like you mentioned, the whole Dungeon of Terror walkthrough, like those lost years. It's crazy because, like you mentioned, people had cameras, but they're sitting in somebody's attic. Those Polaroids are sitting somewhere in a scrapbook, and these people have no idea that we're searching for that history, and they're just kind of sitting on it. I think my mom uploaded a picture that she found. I don't know where she found it, but it was of me as a kid in front of the HHN, like maybe 9 with the mummy.
I know what you're
the mummy
about.
On the banner.
Yeah.
I had no idea we had even gone to Universal at that age, let alone me posing in front of an HHN like banner. But that's the style of history that like we're missing. People have that, and like, man, if we could get our hands onto that random stuff and piece it together, going in the theme of tonight with this mystery book, National Treasure style, and finding all these little bits of history and piecing it all together. That's that's a whole undertaking on its own, but it's cool that you've found enough to create this whole image of the history of the event.
Well, thank you. I hope that the actual product manages to live up to all this hype now.
Oh, I'm sure.
There is one last thing. I don't want to spend a lot of time because I don't want to bore you guys to sleep with this, but my character I said to Xandra writing the HHN. Okay, sorry. I should back up even more.
Mm-hmm.
The whole premise of the book, an hour into our podcast episode, the whole premise of the book is that there's a blogger named Hunter Spivey. He decides to write an actual book about Halloween Horror Nights. As he does, he starts to become convinced there's some kind of conspiracy behind it or within it, and that there's all these strange goings on in Orlando. There's these creepy sightings, there's bells, there's fog, there's power outages. It's almost like all of Orlando becomes a scare zone itself. And he becomes convinced that he's the target of this in part or in full. And he disappears. We now know, of course, that he had his poor little hand cut off and all these strange symbols and stuff inscribed in his flesh. And someone else, a mysterious individual, comes in, finishes his book, mails it to you. Another mysterious individual grabs the book, intercepts it, rips out some stuff she doesn't want you to see, puts in a whole bunch of other stuff that she thinks you should see. It's the real truth. And that's where my original narrative stories chapters come in. And I have a character named Marjorie Holden. She's a disgraced folklorist and former professor. And this became an excuse for me to get into the history of Christmas. You could spend literally your whole life researching this. It is so complicated. It is so convoluted. There's so many different regions. I have a stack of books here next to me. I'm looking at them right now, actually, about Krampus, about specific folklores and traditions, and how. Did you guys know, by the way, that Christmas Day is actually a really great day for werewolf sightings and vampires come out in droves? There's all these just totally bizarre things you would never, ever know. And all these books that I have next to me are just about like, oh, this is just the Germanic portions. This is the section of the Alps, or this is, Scandinavia, and here's Iceland and Greenland and stuff. You can't do the whole history of Christmas in one region, let alone all the regions, because it's so bizarre. There's so much to it. And so I was able to kind of take bits and pieces of that and distill it. And one of the cool things that I tried to do is the original Star Wars, I think very famously by now, George Lucas took Joseph Campbell's book, A Hero of a Thousand Faces, which is the study of, ancient mythology, and he applied it, but put it towards wizards and spaceships and, dungeons in space. I wanted to do that with Krampus. What are the Krampus sightings? What happens? Krampuses have these bells, these very strange sounding bells that are very unique to certain regions of the Alps where Krampus lives. And we took that's the whole basis for the original story. So as all these strange things are going on in Orlando, like people walking down the street and all of a sudden fog rolls in and you hear the bells coming, it's basically all a giant Krampus sighting. Distributed across the entire book. And that was kind of like our into the Christmas mythology and how we could talk about it in the history. Because again, Christmas used to be from October to February. Mm-hmm. So it actually was Halloween, Christmas, and New Year's. It was all the same thing. And eventually over time in certain regions of the planet, they started to get separated. And it wasn't until these funny people called Americans came along and really made Halloween and Christmas two distinct separate things. And so I wanted to get into that history a bit and have an excuse just to touch on it. And hopefully we actually cite sources. You can, if you want to go read these books that I have, like they're really, really well done, really interesting stuff. You can do that. Or you can just kind of, take it for what it is and enjoy it and then go off and see how all this, like these dark elves and Krampuses and stuff and wild Barbaras and dark Lucys and all these other totally bizarre creatures I've never even heard of before. You can see how we incorporated that into the original narrative.
Yeah, that's a lot. that's it just got my head thinking so much too. I'm like, damn, we are such a small fragment of what it is now. It's from where it came from to where it is. It's just insane.
It's like the extensive knowledge I have of Krampus is the Krampus film from Universal Studios.
Which is totally wrong. It's 100% wrong.
Right. But I was just going to say, I was like, wait a minute. I was like, Krampus had a bell in that one. I was like, this sounds a little familiar. All right.
They hit some cornerstones, but that's probably about it.
Yeah, but that's kind of gets back into the HHN aspect, though, when they have cryptids or different folktales and stuff like that they've had at the event. And it's fun, especially how they did with Monstros this year, the Monsters of Latin America. It's interesting to kind of see and learn that background history about some of these characters that personally I might not be as familiar with and some other people as well. So I love all that kind of history of things like that.
Yeah.
There's one little quote I wanted to read to you guys, if I may.
Yes,
I just came across this again. I was refreshing my memory of all this Christmas research I've done over the course of 2 years, and I'm like, oh my god, I totally forgot. I should have written a whole chapter about this. So the idea is that Christmas is this supernaturally unstable time. It's just mayhem. Everything, all these portals open, which we literally incorporated into the story. All these portals open into different realities and different parallel timelines and the afterlife. All these spirits come and go. And here's a fun little one. It was widely believed that at midnight on Christmas Eve, animals were granted the power of speech. The conversations of country livestock were more sinister, with the horses, sheep, and cows sometimes uttering prophecies of death for those who dared to eavesdrop. That's Christmas.
I love it. I love it.
That's the true meaning of Christmas there, folks. You heard it here.
Murdering sheep, yes.
Yes.
Because honestly, how scary would it be if animals actually talked? Like, come on.
like The Witch, right? That's another movie I love. The Witch.
I do too. Nick's not a huge fan of The Witch, but I enjoy it.
Yeah, that one.
Black Phillip.
That one, I was not a fan of that one either. I mean, you would fit in with Seamus's movie takes because we are all pretty different. I was going to say, yeah, different movies. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this has been awesome talking to you. I hope that we got all as much information out as we could, so that way people can add this, because of course this is coming out December 13th. Act fast. I mean, this is the perfect gift for your HHN lovers, your horror lovers, your avid readers, your just beginner readers. This is, if you're in this world and listening to us, this is something that should be added to your collection. So if you head over now to horrorsuntold.com, and Marc was gracious enough, so if you're listening, you can get 20% off. So you can add a code of BEER20, so BER 20, and you can get 20% off of your purchase for Horrors Untold. And we'll have the links posted so you can follow if you don't remember, but simply horrorsuntold.com. And what better time to have this episode than kind of leading up to Christmas, and very fittingly ending with the tale of Christmas, the true Christmas, we may add. But yeah, this has been awesome. I loved learning this much more about it too, because I'm not typically the person that will jump into stuff blind. I like to at least have some vague idea, unless it's somebody asking me to come onto a Horror Nights tour out of the blue, then I will sort of jump in pretty blind. But
thankfully, yes,
this has definitely gotten me excited. That's for sure. But is there any other last things that you really wanted to hit on about this project before we sign off? Because I've gone through my questions, and I got all of my answers.
There's one last thing that I don't know if you knew this. I didn't know this until just now, but I think you were just auditioning for a salesperson for Horrors Untold. I think you're the Billy Mays of Horrors Untold. So
can I get the job? But wait, there's more.
I get it.
Because you just pitched that book way better than I ever could have. So I think I'm just going to have to hire you. You can quit the podcast. Okay, don't quit the podcast. But you can come on to our company and you can just walk around and Billy Mays the book for us. Thank you.
That works for me. I've done that on various fronts before. I've been, that's the server 101 right there. I can sell it. I got it. Especially when it's something. Especially when I'm interested in something. Right. That's when the passion comes out. Mm-hmm. It's in our wheelhouse. It's so fun doing this podcast because we get to put our thoughts out, whether they resonate with everybody that listens to us. They're at least interested enough in this world to devote an hour or an hour and a half, sometimes two if we're feeling frisky, a week, give or take. So it's really cool that our words and our thoughts kind of hold some sort of weight in the community. And this is something that the community, I hope, rallies behind, because as we mentioned previously, this is something that, depending on where it can go from here, right? This could go a bunch of different places. We could get newer editions. We can get, more stories and more tales. And I just really think that this is something that should be up everybody that's listening's alley. If they're listening to us, they're going to love this product. It's Horror Nights. It's mystery. It's that feeling of, being there while you're not, which is the perfect off-season cure to the HHN blues, that we sort of refer to it as such. But yeah, I'm excited. But I just wanted to thank you for coming on. We talked about this at the beginning of the season when we first met, and we're like, when the time, you were still kind of wrapping up everything, putting the final bows on everything before this got released. Towards, I believe we sort of ended up releasing the end of October around that time, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh God, I have to remember back. Yes, the first edition came out in October. The second edition is coming out right now. Actually, it's at the printer right now. It'll be at my house in a couple of days.
There we go.
It feels like it's been the last 2 months. I felt like 2 lifetimes. It's been crazy.
Right. But I'm excited to see where this goes. I really hope, and I assume that the HHN community can rally behind this, because it's such a it's a for the fans, by the fans, and those are the things that we love. We try to support all of that as much as we can, and especially when it's good people doing it, people that we know and love. And I'm so excited that I get to say I know people that got to see this through from start to finish and created this final product. It's just so impressive to me when people do these cool feats, and it's just somebody should champion. I know you're not the person to stand out there and like champion yourself, but this is a very big undertaking. So congratulations, obviously, to you and the entire team that somehow managed to over 3 years piece all of this together. It truly is like it's a big deal. It really is. It's just no quick, we decide to write a book, here it is kind of thing.
Well, let me turn the tables on you for just a moment. First of all, thank you very much. Like, seriously, those are very kind words. They're words you're right, I am not able to say. It's very nice and rewarding to hear, because the whole time I'm like, will this find an audience? I don't know, but man, like, even if it's just one person, it's just one Nick,
yeah,
and he gets it and he gets to appreciate it, like it's worth it.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Of course.
I have to admit, I am a relatively recent convert to Fear and Beer.
Yeah,
it was only earlier this year that I discovered you guys. I've really been enjoying.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of over the last 2 years. It's funny that we're doing this now, because this is a week or so after our Spotify Wrapped has come out, and every year it's like 89% of your listeners have found you this year, or like we keep getting these crazy, ridiculous, cool. new numbers, which is it's nice to see. It really is cool.
It's very rewarding, because I know I used to do a podcast. I know how many long hours it is, and trying to do agendas, and I know you're saying you're free flowing, but still it's a tremendous amount of work. I see Jamie over there yawning because it's been a long day.
No, it's not even that. I was just thinking
she's
too.
A sleepy girl.
It is a lot of work, but it's funny that you say that, because I feel like sometimes with us being free flowing, it's hard for me to present my words in a proper fashion. It's definitely much more easier for myself to write out my thoughts as well.
Oh, of course. I mean, yeah.
Yes.
You're a writer as well. You're afflicted with that curse.
Yes.
But it's been wonderful being on the podcast, and I'm sorry that I ruined it for you, and it's the end of your run.
Oh my God,
sorry.
Not at all.
It's great.
You're helping us
great
out.
getting to meet you.
This is our off season.
Right. Hopefully next HHN, if we're still around, if we're still doing stuff, we'll have to we'll rope Jamie in too. Jamie can stay behind with the kids,
Yeah.
But we'll expand it that way too.
Yes.
So
definitely.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for all the kind words.
Thank you for coming
ruining
on.
your podcast.
Of course. That's this is what we love doing. We love expanding the community. It is funny how we just started this little podcast, and slowly but surely we've sort of become engraved a little bit into the community itself. So I'd like to think that what we say holds a little bit of weight with everybody. And again, you can get this book, purchase it at horrorsuntold.com. Use the code BEER20 to get 20% off your order. And perfect Christmas gift. I mean, you really can't. If you're searching for that little something that you don't know what to get, that weird Horror Nights nerd, well, you're welcome. You can check that off the list.
You're welcome.
But yeah, that about wraps us up. So Mark, when we sign off, we typically do like a little round the horn. We'll go Nick, Jamie. And then after Jamie says her name, feel free to say Mark, and I'll take us home. You think you're up? You think you're up for the task there, Mark?
I know it's asking a lot,
but I'll do it. I can say my name. I'll say it in Japanese.
That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do. Okay. Well, until next time, this is Nick.
This is Jamie.
This is Maku.
Happy Hunter Haunts. And thank you for listening to another episode of Fear and Beer, a Halloween Horror Nights podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on whatever streaming platform you are listening to us on. And you can find us on all of our socials at Fear and Beer Pod.